So the main rubric here is mainstreaming planning and mainstreaming adaptation in fiscal policy. Under that, we have to look at mainstreaming adaptation in public financial management, obviously, because a lot of the adaptation is for the community at various levels, for private firms at various levels. It's not for individuals, individual families, individual companies. So in this sense, it will always involve public financing, and it will always need public financial management to consider adaptation very critically. Mainstreaming adaptation in public financial management, well-integrated planning and budgeting functions are key for implementing adaptation plans. I'm going to read this text in this section basically because this is very critical for the global south, which typically have very inefficient public financial management systems, and that hurts international financing sometimes, because international entities, whether they are banks or IMF or donors, they may always hesitate if the public financial management is not seen as well governed, efficient, and non-corrupt, right? So planning establishes, did I read this? Well-integrated planning and budgeting functions are key for implementing adaptation plans. Planning establishes a framework of government goals, policies, and targets, including on adaptation, while budgeting puts these policies into a defined fiscal envelope, which is what we are focused on here in terms of fiscal policies for adaptation. The medium-term fiscal framework should link long-term adaptation objectives in national plans and short to medium-term budget resources, so immediate expenditures, revenues, and financing plans. It provides strategic guidance to ensure that annual budgets align with and contribute to the implementation of adaptation policies. You cannot have them develop independently. You can technically have lots of academic output on adaptation options, needs, policies, and then to actually convert it into decisions and actions, you need to get real about public financial management in this case. It should also factor in climate risks and debt sustainability objectives. So there is a bigger framework in which this is happening, right? Climate-related disasters, like any other types of natural disasters, are an important type of fiscal risk and need to be integrated in fiscal planning and budgeting. There are 3 steps here that we will read a little bit. To this end, the first step is to identify and quantify those fiscal risks. Always tricky, since any risk calculation is going to have uncertainty, but you have to hedge your bets anyways. Governments could usefully take stock of public assets exposed to natural hazards, especially those related to critical public services such as energy, water, transportation, healthcare, civil protection, and education. The information of asset category, location, and conditions will be then used in quantifying fiscal risks by analyzing the probability and intensity of natural hazards, asset exposure, and the degree of damage to assets due to those hazards. Other sources of climate-related fiscal risks, such as revenue loss or unexpected post-disaster expenditures, also could usefully be identified and quantified. Quantify these risks, governments can start with historical analysis of losses from disasters. Data will be needed to do this. More forward-looking methodologies can also be deployed because changing climate leads to changes in the frequency, intensity, spatial extent, duration, and timing of extreme weather and climate events, which will impact the channels, likelihood, and magnitude of related fiscal risks. So you're always trying to translate climate risks into fiscal risks. Of course, climate risks projections have uncertainties, and the translation to fiscal risks also have additional uncertainties, so you have to manage all that. Then the disclosure of climate-related fiscal risks, ideally as part of the overall fiscal risk statement, can help to guide policymakers and the public toward risk management priorities. The last step for ensuring effective fiscal planning and budgeting is to factor these fiscal risks in fiscal planning and make provisions in the budget, including by investing in resilience to reduce risks, by creating fiscal buffers, by ensuring budget flexibilities, and by making risk transfer agreement to manage residual risks. Okay, several other public financial management tools are available for countries to implement adaptation policies throughout the budget cycle, and you can read this paper. Fiscal authorities can identify critical entry points, which we looked at in PFM processes and tools, to support adaptation objectives. The IMF's Green PFM framework suggests adjusting PMF processes and tools throughout the budget cycle, from planning to execution and control, to integrate climate considerations. Gradual adjustments of existing processes and tools are preferable to creating parallel procedures. So you should adjust your mainstream process and framework rather than creating a parallel procedure separately for adaptation and public financial management. Climate change adaptation should be embedded in the medium-term budget and expenditure frameworks for multi-year climate expenditure planning and fiscal reports, including ad hoc reports such as climate budget reports. Other examples include the Budget Circular, which provides guidance to ministries and agencies on how to link their budget proposals with national priorities, which could include adaptation policies. So you have development priorities which are very critical for most of the global south, especially India and China, the big emitters now. So you cannot have that going forward without somehow integrating adaptation into providing sustainable development pathways, right? Climate budget tagging has been used by some countries as a tool for tracking and reporting adaptation expenditure. We talked about budget tagging before. External audits can be useful to ensure the quality of these reports as well as government performance on adaptation. So monitoring, verification, and progress evaluation is always critical. Countries can also support the oversight of climate policies by setting up a dedicated independent body, whether that becomes a ministry or a part of the ministry or an independent agency. It's not always dictated, but may depend on government's functional process. Some particular political party may be more progressive on climate action, some particular state may be more progressive on climate action. So everybody may do it differently in terms of how oversight is done. Integrating adaptation policies and measures in PFM processes will likely require changes to countries' PFM legal frameworks. So everything has to be protected in that sense as well. Let's read off this box as well. How long am I in this podcast? 8 minutes, so let me add a bit more, continue, and then we will try to wrap up. Box 3, key features of the green I didn't mean to do that. Key features of the Green Public Finance Management Framework. The IMF's Green PFM framework explores avenues to adopt Green PFM practices across and beyond the budget cycle. This framework essentially relies on the following series of questions, so read them off. Legal framework. Are Green PFM practices underpinned by an adequate legal framework so that people don't tie you up in legal challenges and basically prevent the functioning of Green PFM? Strategic planning and fiscal framework. Do strategic planning tools such as National Development Plan, medium-term fiscal frameworks take into account green concerns? Budget preparation. Are tools in place to integrate climate concerns into budget preparation and allocation? So these include climate impact assessment, tagging of expenditures affecting the environment, green spending reviews, and so on. Budget execution and accounting. Is the PFM system able to track and monitor outcomes of green expenditures? Key question. Control and audit. Are oversight institutions such as supreme audit institutions equipped to analyze and hold to account climate-related expenditures and outcomes? Public investment management. Do public investment management choices in terms of planning, allocation of resources, and implementation adequately reflect climate concerns, both in terms of adaptation and mitigation of climate change? Fiscal transparency. Are efforts being made to ensure transparency and accountability for environmental aspects all across the budget cycle? So budget cycles are very important and timely, and they have to be executed legally on time for managing the financial years and so on. And they have short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals, and fiscal buffer decides many things in terms of implementation. So adaptation shouldn't be always an afterthought in the budget cycle. Coordination with subnational governments and state-owned enterprises. Have PFM practices been adjusted to ensure that these important fiscal actors play a role in the achievement of environmental goals? Okay, so let's read one more before we leave this podcast. Governments would also benefit from mainstreaming climate resilience perspectives in public investment management, PIM. So there is public finance management and public investment management. So governments would also benefit from mainstreaming climate resilience perspectives in public investment management institutions and processes. Climate-sensitive PIM can enhance decision-making on capital projects by ensuring climate risks are robustly assessed and adaptation solutions are systematically considered in project design, appraisal, selection, and implementation. For example, adaptation investments could be based on, among others, solid cost-benefit analysis and social impact assessments, with the impact of intensifying climate risks on their results sufficiently considered. Okay. The enhancement can help reduce the possibility and consequences of infrastructure disruptions in the aftermath of climate hazards. There are some other details about new projects and so on, but the IMF is developing a climate module for the public investment management assessment to support member countries in assessing how their PIM systems have integrated climate considerations. It's always good when there is a global perspective from an external agency with sufficient regional specificity that countries can exploit the tools developed by them and extend them to adaptation, its mainstreaming in fiscal policy, and also public financial management and public investment management and so on, to build resilience of these financial systems along with adaptation to climate hazards and so on. Okay, so we are close to the end. This one is a shorter staff report, so we'll come back and try to wrap it up maybe another podcast or two. Okay.